Welcome back. I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fulyana Osborne, and this is Inside Exec. We're continuing our discussion with Yonason Goldson, and this week we're learning about the value of listening in any situation.
One of the questions that we sent you, I don't know where this came from, but I just figured you'd be the one who'd have the answer to it. How can we recognise wise heads on young shoulders? And I think actually, now that I say it, I think I felt that, having looked at your own personal history, that you were a wise head on young shoulders at a very early age. You know, the idea of hitchhiking across the country and just listening to people, I think is a wise head on young shoulders, because how often would we in that moment be worried about our own personal issues rather than the person who's giving us a lift from A to B. So having identified now that you are the old head on young shoulders, how do we recognise it?
Well, I have to say, I think this is the first time ever anyone has called me wise for going hitchhiking cross country.
We live on the edge in this country, you know that.
That's right. In retrospect, I'm very glad I did it. I'd be absolutely horrified if any of my children would want to do that. As my mother was justifiably horrified when I wanted to do it. But I was really intrigued by the phrasing of your question, because I did spend 23 years in the classroom. And it didn't take long to identify the students that I would have called wise heads. Mm-hmm. And it usually had most to do with the questions they asked, and then their response to the answers they received. When I was in religious seminary, one of my rabbis said once that people accuse us of brainwashing. He said, "We don't wash brains here; we dry clean them." Well, that was a joke. Right? But the real answer was that brainwashing cults, they don't encourage asking questions, whereas this institution did, and that's what Jewish learning is all about. It's all about asking questions, challenging. One of the classic stories from the era of the sages, almost 2,000 years ago, is that student passed away. And his rabbi was deeply depressed because he was such an engaging student. Who's going to challenge me the way this student did? And so the sages went scrambling. They found another great scholar to put in his class. And then everything that the rabbi said, this new student would bring many proofs that he was right. It didn't take long before he lost his patience. He said, "I don't need you to tell me I'm right. I know I'm right." My previous student, he would pose challenges to everything I said. And by answering his questions, we would come to a deeper appreciation of the truth, come to deeper understanding. So the wise students are the ones who ask insightful questions and then listen to the answers. The answers will often raise new questions. The people who don't ask, there are two reasons why you don't ask. Maybe three. You know it all. You think you know it all, which is much more likely, or you just don't care, which is also far too common. There are two reasons to ask a question. You can ask a question because you're curious, or you can ask a question as a challenge or an attack. I mean, what's that supposed to mean? It may have a question mark on the end of it, but it's not really a question. Yeah. And so the students who are intellectually curious and are receptive to the answers, not that they'll swallow them whole just because the teacher said so, but because they're trying to understand, well, how is this an answer? And if they're not satisfied, they'll keep probing, not because they want to show up the teacher, but because they really want to get to a new level of understanding. And when you find young people like that, those are the ones we want to cultivate, we want to encourage, we really want to bring along, because they can be the teachers of the next generation.
In taking that into account, that would be very powerful in an organization where you have a culture that encourages that and look at it in the same way as you did in the classroom.
Yeah, in fact, one of the stories I tell in my keynote is about Alcoa Aluminum, the largest manufacturer of aluminum in the world. And in the 70s and 80s, they were in terrible shape. Energy costs, energy prices, labor costs, sluggish economy. And they brought in a new CEO, a fellow named Paul O'Neill. And he made his number one priority worker safety, and everybody thought he was crazy. The guy's a hippie. What's he talking about? Right? But one of the things he did is he put suggestion boxes in all the plants for workers to submit safety hazards. And when they did, the company spent $3 million in 2 months to fix potential problems.
Mm-hmm.
What happened after that is that employees started using the suggestion boxes to propose other changes in productivity and operations. And some of them were extremely profitable suggestions.
Great. Yeah.
He created a culture
Yeah.
in which the employees felt that they had a voice
Yeah.
and that they had a contribution to make, and that they wanted to make that contribution because they saw that management was now starting to look out for them. They felt like partners. They wanted to be participants.
My question was around being a leader as well. If you've got an environment where you have someone in the team who constantly asks the questions, and you see that as a challenge because you're constrained by all these other things that perhaps they don't understand. It's about opening up your mind to why are they asking that question? Have I not explained it well enough? But also about you not always being the one that provides the answer, but allowing someone else on the team to phrase it in a different way, to give other sorts of examples so that the whole team is learning, the whole team is coming together in terms of sharing that information or sharing their understanding of the situation or the question that's being asked, and to not ever feel frustrated by the number of questions that are being asked because it's an indication that the message is not getting through.
Yeah, and there's a very sharp lady by the name of Cy Wakeman, has a very popular podcast. She says that leaders are translators,
Mm-hmm.
and that when somebody comes with a complaint, because that's usually how it happens, right?
Yeah.
People got a complaint about something, right? To translate that complaint, first to get to the root of it, what are they really upset about? And then to reframe it as, okay, so what shall we do about this?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you just venting? And if you're just venting, I might have 2 minutes for you. If you actually want to try to come up with a way of addressing it, then I have more time for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Maybe the thing you're upset about, you don't even realize what the root of that problem is. And that's something we have to get to. But at the same time, there's this expression that all of us are smarter than any of us.
Yeah.
And the answer is often in the room.
In the room.
Yes.
And when leaders are willing to open up and let others have some input, frequently answers that the leader may not have, because nobody can know everything. And if my ego's on the line and I have to be the one, right?
Yes.
If I have to be the one coming with the answers, well, we're going to come up short from time to time, maybe too often.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we have, particularly last year, I think, the guests that we had were very much in the vein of servant leadership. So they were not looking to be the ones who knew everything, but rather their job was to serve the rest of the team and to show them ways that they could find the answers together. Just an interesting change in the trend of management that we noticed, particularly last year when we were talking to people. Do you see that as something that's more prevalent now?
Well, that's really interesting to me, because this term servant leader, which seems to have caught on recently, it actually goes back to King Solomon. It's been around for a while. When he became king, he was only 12 years old. The scripture says that God came to him in a dream and said, ask whatever you want. And Solomon's request was, give your servant an understanding heart so he can lead your people. Well, it's because you ask not for yourself, but for the people, I'm going to make you the wisest person who's ever lived. And so the stories we know about Solomon is tremendous wisdom. But the idea, the lesson there, whether you want to believe in the scriptural account literally or not, but the idea is that when a leader sees himself or herself, it's a position, it's a responsibility to serve others. And that doesn't mean abdicating power or the authority. It means, what do I do with my power? What do I do with my authority? I may still be getting a 6 or 7 figure paycheck, but am I just worried about my golden parachute? Am I just worried about my stock options? Or am I really committed to making this enterprise successful for the people who are part of it and for the mission that should define what we're all here for? I think the world is, I think it's obvious that the world has become so polarized, but I think within business, you find this also. It's almost ancient history to talk about Enron, but it's such an instructive story because most Americans never even heard of Enron before it collapsed. And we're told, oh, by the way, there's this company. It's just about the biggest company in America. And you never heard of it. And then now it's in ruins. But they talk about the culture in the company. It was a culture where they intentionally pitted executives against each other. With the philosophy that the strong will survive. And the terriers will, they're the ones who are going to come out ahead. And it appeared to work for a while until it didn't. Whereas when you create a culture where the way Jim Collins describes it in Good to Great is the leader's job is to get the right people on the bus and get them all in the right seats. Help people be in positions, the right person, the right position, or the right job, so they're all working together. And then culture starts to take care of itself. Yeah, exactly. Two people are doing the same job. One of them's unnecessary.
I think we more and more looking at the leadership. It's a collective. I know people don't like hearing it. That doesn't mean the head leader, if you like, has got diminished responsibility. In fact, you have to be stronger to lead through others, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, leadership is, we talked about my definition of ethics. My definition of leadership is empowering and enabling others to fulfill their personal potential in a way that serves the organization and the world. Obviously, that's easier said than done. And this is why, in my mind, it all comes back to ethics, because ethics is about the way you treat people. It's about competence. It's about planning. It's about creating a culture where there's trust. There has to be humility. There has to be empathy. There has to be curiosity, and there has to be courage. And all of these components, when they are integrated into an organization, inevitably it's going to be successful. Inevitably, the people who are part of it are going to want to be there because they understand there's a vision, there's a purpose, there's a culture that it's conducive to achievement and to respect and to diversity, because you have to have different outlooks and different points of view so that we're not all parroting one another and echoing one another. These are all the components. The job of leadership is to create the culture. Once the culture is healthy, then most of the problems are going to take care of themselves.
Well, I want to go back to the hitchhiking days. I know the story, but I think it'll be appreciated by very many of our listeners. You went to what we would term college, and at the end of it had your piece of paper, but not really any direction. And so made this decision that this is what you were going to do. When you made that decision, what did you think you were going to get out of it?
Well, I had a couple of motivations. I mean, I went to college at a time when you did not necessarily go deeply into debt for a university education, which is something that's quite different now. And when I talk to my kids as they entered adulthood, my wife and I made it very clear to them, we'll help you as much as we can, but we are only going to support you if you have a plan. I went to college and I could get a degree in English because that's what we did back then. You went for 4 years, you found yourself, you figured out who you were and what you wanted to do, kind of. You can't do that if you're going to end up $250,000 in debt. It's just not realistic. So, I've got a daughter who's a doctor. I have a son who's in finance in Wall Street, and I've got another daughter who went to college in Israel where things are not nearly so expensive. When I was in college, I studied English, and I loved it. I loved the stories. I loved the lessons. I loved the philosophy. But when I got done, okay, I have a degree in English. Now what? The plan came together for a couple of reasons. One, I'd always wanted to be a writer. And I realized I didn't really have anything to write about. I didn't have any great experiences. I didn't have any great thoughts that were my own. And part of that I recognize is because I'd grown up in this very comfortable middle-class bubble. We weren't rich, but never really had to worry too much about where the food was coming from or how the bills were getting paid. I could take jobs as in high school, but it wasn't because I really needed to. It was just for spending money. I hadn't really faced any serious challenges. Life had just been very comfortable. And I felt that I really needed to challenge myself by putting myself in a situation of facing the unpredictable day after day after day.
Yeah.
And at the same time, develop some experience that I could actually use to figure out what kinds of stories I wanted to tell. And that was really what motivated me to do what many thought was an absolutely insane adventure.
You decided to do it on your own. I know that in those days, because we're from that same generation, a lot of people decided they would do it with others, or at least one
Well, that
other.
was a little earlier. Yeah, that would have been in the 60s or 70s. I did it in the 80s, and by then there wasn't much of it going on anymore. You know,
Yeah.
the days when a whole group of people are standing on an off-ramp and a Volkswagen bus pulls up and as many pile in as could fit. Those days were over.
Yeah.
More than one person hitchhiking would have made it much more difficult. It was hard enough
Yeah.
because people just were not stopping as often as they did. You know, I developed all sorts of psychologies. And my first time out, I was standing by the side of the road and outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico for an hour,
Right.
just watching cars go by and wondering, is this actually going to happen? And then literally after an hour, I had this brain flash and I pulled out my notebook. I got out my pen and I wrote in big block letters, Denver. And I held it. And literally within minutes, a car pulled over.
Yeah.
And the driver said to me, you know, I've never picked up a hitchhiker before, but I'm going to Denver and I saw your line. I thought, your sign. I thought I should give him a ride. And that was very instructive.
Yeah.
And I think it is till to this day. If you have a destination, it gives you credibility.
Yeah.
And if you're going someplace that other people want to go, they want to go with you.
Yeah.
And we can take that lesson in business, in life. So that's what set me on my way. And then, you know, what I talk about in the TED Talk is how the way I felt I should pay for my ride is being a good listener, because a lot of people want someone to talk to. And people more than once, somebody said to me, you know, telling me about their lives. And they say, I've never told this to my wife. I've never told this to my best friends. I've never told it to my parents or my kids, right? Because it's the strangers on a train or the strangers in a car. Right? They know they're never going to see me again. And so it's safe for them to tell me these things. And my job is not to respond with my story or to give them advice. It's just to listen. And that's a skill that I think we could all work on better.
Absolutely. That skill has obviously carried through all of your life. Is it something now that you rely on, that you consider is part of your core being?
Well, one of the fundamental values in Judaism is summed up in a verse from the Torah that we say in the morning and the evening every day of our lives, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one." And that word "hear," with all of its many meanings, hear, listen, pay attention, make known, assemble, obey, it informs our whole attitude to be a good listener, to give oneself the opportunity to learn. You know, one of the sages said, I grew up among sages. He was the son of the leading sage of the previous generation. He said, I grew up among the sages, and I never found anything better for a person than silence. And certainly in this day and age, when there's so much noise, when everybody seems to have all kinds of things to say, whether at least they think they do.
Well, they say them anyway, yes.
Yeah.
That, exactly. I mean, being discerning, to whom do we listen?
Right.
Who do we let into our lives? Who do we let into our brains? That's the different type of challenge today, to find the people that are really worth listening to and take advantage of their wisdom. Because there's so much. I mean, YouTube is a remarkable platform.
Yeah.
It has all kinds of wisdom, and it has all kinds of stuff that you should never expose yourself to.
Yeah.
Having the ability and the willingness to discern what should I be consuming. You know, what we consume online is at least as important as what we put into our bodies.
And it comes back to that discipline and that responsibility that you have to yourself of knowing what your values are, what your beliefs are, what you need to give back in terms of your contribution to the world, and keeping the information that you're taking in within that framework.
Yeah, and certainly when when my travels took me across the Atlantic, across Europe, and I ended up in Israel, and through a sort of unlikely events, I ended up in a religious seminary. And not because I was planning on becoming religious. It was just that sort of providential direction that sent me there. And the first day I'm in there, the rabbi walks in, and this is a story I tell in my TED Talk, and he is Hasidic with the big hat and the beard and the side locks, the long coat. And oh my gosh, I can't listen to this. I know what he's going to say. But I'd taken a seat in the back corner of the room, and it was so full now I couldn't get out. And when he started speaking, he was all of a sudden, he doesn't have a Yiddish accent. He has a New England accent, and he sounds like a college professor, which I later found out he was. And being willing to listen, even when viscerally, I was absolutely convinced this person couldn't possibly have anything to say to me of value. Nothing they could say could possibly have interest for me. But I listened. And when I recognized that, there's actually something here, if I want to have intellectual integrity, I can't just dismiss what he says because I don't like the way he looks.
Yeah.
I have to take it seriously. I have to engage him. I have to ask questions. Maybe it'll take me a few weeks to prove that he's all wrong. 9 years later, I left Israel and became a teacher myself.
There you go.
It's interesting that all of what we've talked about comes back continuously to this idea of listening and of not labeling. And I think the not labeling is the message that comes across so strongly in everything that we've talked about today. We do thank you for your time and for your insights and for sharing your travels and experiences with us. For now, I'm Kim Bailey. She's Fulyana Osborne. We've been talking with Yonason Goldson, and this is Inside Exec.